Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Sam trying to spin to win on Zwift. Today's stage 2 of the FRR Tour de France race series.
Another day, another race.
And we'll be tackling the Douce France course. In fact, we'll do 2 laps of it, totaling around 48 kilometers. And I think it will take about just over an hour or so, looking at some of the earlier races that have already been completed today. Should be an interesting race. The course itself is relatively uninteresting, if you will.
Boring!
But given there's a mass start with 4 or 5 pens, or 4 or 5 categories in my start pen, the stronger categories will push the pace from the start. And for me, it'll just be a case of hang on as long as I can. So it should be an interesting race. Lots of sprints, the Acqueduc KOM. There'll definitely be some points for separation. Today I also thought we'd take a quick look at the GC leaderboard from yesterday's ITT. Wanted to have a couple comments about the overall classification system, why it's good and why there are some issues with it as well. We'll then have a quick look at the course, and then before we get into the action. Again, normally I have a section on the competition, but again, I don't think everything has shaken through or completely for it to settle down to have a good comparison of the CRP category yet. That'll come in future videos. So, with that, let's see how we get on today. So, the results from yesterday's ITT. First, let's have a look at the leaderboard in the CRP division. Some absolutely fantastic times here. For example, the winner, Jamie Cahill, would have been close to top 10 in the top CAP category. And the 2 other podium spots would have been in top 10 in the DRA, or second highest category. I will give a few more thoughts on this in a second, but first, let's look where I ended up. After scrolling some considerable distance,
Way too long.
I show up in 78th place out of 124 riders. Well, I knew CRP would be challenging for me.
That's the understatement of the year.
So I'm actually pleased with being towards the middle of the pack. While I got my pacing strategy a bit wrong yesterday, I don't think I could have done much better than I did. So, with that realization, I think if I can finish in the top half of competitors in the CRP division at the end of the tour, I will be very satisfied. Man, there are so many strong riders in the CRP division. I also quickly wanted to comment on some of the issues with the classification system. I think the winner in the CRP division, Jamie, is a great example of what I mean. I am in no way calling Jamie out here, but I think he presents a good illustration of why I think FRR Control will be very busy sorting out the categories as we continue the tour. If we have a look at Jamie's Zwift power profile, we can see that he is an extremely strong rider. Cat A+ with some monster watt and watts per kilo figures. If we then review his Zwift racing app profile, we can see that he has not raced that much recently. Like many others, he probably just rode outdoors during the summer and he's just getting back into Zwifting. Absolutely no problems with that. But if we look at his Zwift racing app score, while it is now 2006, you can see that he made some very large jumps in the last couple of days, as he did a club ladder race and then the ITT yesterday. So, while he was absolutely correctly classed as CRP at the start of the tour, it is quite clear from this that he belongs in the top category, or CAP. In fact, he has already moved into the DRA category, as his VELO score is now over 2000, and I don't think he will be stopping from there. Again, I am not calling out Jamie in any way, shape or form, but his situation illustrates the issue with the current classification scheme. By the way, I think it's a really, really good system, and in a few months, once people get more Zwifting under the belt, it will be much better and more accurate. But until then, I think we'll see a lot of outliers, such as Jamie. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if, say, the top 10 or even top 20 in all categories currently are classified 1 or 2, if not more, categories too low. So FRR Race Control will be busy indeed. Looking at today's course, Douce, France, in the FRR Tourbook, we can see that it will be a pretty flat stage. We will do 2 full laps, so I expect the race to take just over an hour. The only real feature is the Acqueduc KOM, and that is not really a climb, more of a significant bump in the road. However, I still think we'll see lots of action today, given the sprints involved. People will be pushing really hard here, and even if you're not going for sprint points per se, you will be forced to put in some serious efforts in order to stay with the front of the group. The pace will also be generally high, since it is a mass start where a number of categories will start in the pens at the same time. So, if you're in one of the lower categories in your pen, the higher categories will push the pace for sure at the start.
Lucky you.
And that will make the start of the race very challenging indeed. So in summary, make sure you're alert during the sprint sections and expect a hard push up the Acqueduc KOM, and try to save some for the sprint at the end.
Let's race.
As we roll off the line, just a quick summary of my tactics today. Well, as with most FRR races, it seems they are pretty simple. Just hang on as long as you can to the front group. As I start with a lot of CAP&DRA riders, the way the race turns out is usually up to them. If they push hard, it will be hard all the way, and if they chill a bit, well, it is easy until they then light it up. For this race, I thought I could hang on to the first Acqueduc KOM, and then it may be difficult, but we would have to see how the race turned out. The start was hard, but not insane. I think I was averaging around 4 watts per kilo for the first 5 minutes or so, before the pace eased just a little. We have now skipped forward slightly to the first sprint of the day, the balloon sprint. Pace had stayed high, but manageable, and I wanted to show you what the sprints looked like from my perspective throughout the race. The pace picks up a couple hundred meters before the sprint, and then the front of the race go hard. I am trying to manage my effort and produce high consistent watts rather than going all out for a bit. I am no expert on cycling, far from it, but I'm hoping this means I burn a few less matches. But please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. After the sprint is over, I still continue my managed effort for another 10 to 15 seconds in order to get back towards the front of the group, and I am ready for an attack in case it comes right after the sprint. We have skipped forward again, this time to the start of the Acqueduc KOM. Again, pace had stayed high, but not too taxing, and I am now readying myself for what I think may be an all-out effort coming up. I am positioning myself towards the front of the race so that I can, if needed, slide backwards through the peloton and get as much draft as possible. But to my surprise, I didn't need a max effort here. Yes, it was still a hard effort, and I was doing 6 or 7 watts per kilo for the whole sprint section, but again, not as much as I feared. And I push a bit after the sprint banner to pick up some speed to have a short rest down the descent. Again, I am watching for another attack here, as I was sure at some point that would have to happen after one of the sprints. I wanted to show you this section of the race, as this is something that I am not used to. However, I think it's much more common in Cat A racing, of which I have zero experience. All of a sudden, on the flat, a rider goes off the front and pushes the pace, and immediately a few others follow, and then the chase is on by the peloton. I suppose the peloton was a bit tired after the Acqueduc KOM and the pavé sprint, so it is a good place to attack. But I just don't really see this in Cat B racing, or in the lower divisions, I suppose. But clearly, a top Cat A rider is strong enough that they can make these breaks from a large peloton on the flat. For a second, it felt like a real actual race you see on TV, with the brake going up the road. Eventually this brake was closed down though, but I was really starting to feel the effort at this point. I have skipped forward a few more kilometers here, and a single rotor is actually up the road by a few seconds, but that didn't seem to bother the peloton. Then again, all of a sudden there's a serious push at the front and the pace immediately picks up. Again, this brake is closed down, but I certainly burned another match here, and I am getting more tired by the minute. We have again skipped forward, this time by quite a bit. And now we are approaching the Marina sprint just before the start of the second lap. After the two initial attacks on the flat were brought back, the pace settled down a bit. Not much, but a bit. But then as we approach the sprint, it picks up again. And this time quite a bit. I tried to stay towards the front here, as I know right after the sprint there are a few bumps at the start of the second lap where, if you're not careful, you can easily fall behind. But then all of a sudden I find myself in front of the peloton with a gap to some 10 riders ahead. And for some reason I decide to close the gap. Why I did this, I do not know. I should definitely leave this to the stronger guys. So I burned more than a few matches here doing this stupid move. When will I ever learn? Idiot! After that, the pace stays high and I am quite fatigued now. And I know I have to keep pushing over the rollers. And I am cursing my attempt to close that gap. Stupid, stupid, stupid. We push quite hard over the rollers. And this is where I'm starting to think that if there is another strong attack, I may struggle to stay with the front group. But as soon as we get over the last large roller, everybody sits up. I was surprised, but certainly relieved. This would have been the place to attack for sure, if you had the energy to go for a break, as I think it would have stuck. At this point, as I'm really suffering, I would ask that you hit that subscribe button. It probably won't make my suffering any less, but I would appreciate it very much. Thank you. We have now skipped forward to around 2 kilometers left of the race. Once the peloton sat up after the rollers at the start of the second lap, the pace slowed significantly. It was almost like an unspoken agreement that there would be no more attacks until the sprint at the end. I was not complaining though, since I was quite tired just before the peloton sat up, but it was an interesting phenomenon to watch. People were even talking about rolling over the line as a big blob. But then with about 1.4 kilometers to go, somebody decides to up the pace on the front and the race to the finish is on. My legs are gone by this point. I wasn't really that winded and my heart rate was relatively low, but the legs felt like lead, most likely fatigue from the ITT yesterday and a relatively hard first lap of the course today. At around 900 meters to go, the pace really picks up and I just tried to stay towards the front as best as I can without going all out, as I know I can't keep that up for that long. People really start going for it with around 500 meters to go. That is longer than I'm used to, really, and I try to hang on as best as I can. I put in my last dig with 100 meters to go and I roll over the line in 39th place. I was cooked at the end, but I still feel like I could have done slightly better at the very end of that sprint and grabbed perhaps another 4 or 5 spots. But overall the mission was accomplished, as I didn't really lose any time using eGap on today's stage. Now a quick look at the results. Adrian Hassel took the win, ahead of Rain in second, with Chris Peck finishing third. Many congratulations to our podium. Looking at the power numbers, they all put in very strong sprints at the end, as you would expect from strong Cat A and A+ riders. Again, we have to scroll a bit to find me in 39th place. Although only 5 seconds or so behind the winner, that felt like a million miles at the end. When I am fatigued at the end of a race, I just don't have that 10-second sprint that others seem to have, even if they're tired. Wrong muscle type perhaps, or I'm just old and not as fit as the winners. But as mentioned, my goal today was just to stay with the front group, which I did, so I am quite happy with the overall result. One thing to point out is how relatively accurate the predicted VELO scores are. For me, it predicted I would come in 37th, compared to my actual place of 39th. And if we look at most of the other riders, they are often within plus or minus 5 spots or so of their predicted finish. Of course, there are outliers, but in general, this shows, at least to me, that the VELO score system works well. Now, a few final thoughts before we wrap up the video.
All right, as usual, a few thoughts post-race now that I'm warming down. Well, I wouldn't call it a Snoozefest, but not far from it really. That race did not go at all the way I thought it would. I thought it would be a really competitive, attritional race today, but it turned out to be almost the opposite. Seemed like there was almost an agreement in the second lap in the peloton that we wouldn't really push, apart from the final sprint of course, which is fair enough. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, that was a perfect race for me today. Exactly what I needed, because my legs were still really tired from yesterday's ITT. So while I wouldn't call it a rest, it wasn't as hard as it could have been, that's for sure. I think I finished about 40th. Position didn't really matter too much today because I was only a few seconds behind the winner. So my E-gap on GC will be very, very small. We'll take that and move on till tomorrow's race. I think that's going to be much, much harder. So rest up, get some good food, and then we'll go again tomorrow. Apart from that, I don't think there's too much else to say about that race. So I think we'll end it there. This is Sam, trying to spin to win on Zwift, and I'll see you in the next one.